From an earlier era, Paul Newman and Robert Redford portray two other legends, the most outrageous and endearing outlaws in Western history, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, who are the subject of the Sunday film, the winner of 4 Academy Awards and one of the most successful westerns of all times. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid at 7:45 here on BBC1 on Sunday.
There's a new year on BBC television. On BBC1, the new Doctor Who emerges, now twice weekly on Mondays and Tuesdays.
Welcome aboard. I'm the Doctor. Or will be, if this regeneration works out.
And in the new edition of Radio Times, actor Peter Davison talks about his new role as the celebrated Doctor. Starting next Friday on BBC1, Fame is the Spur, a dramatic rags-to-riches story with Joanna David and Tim Pigott-Smith.
We could do a lot together, you and I. We believe in the same things, don't we?
Radio Times has a feature article about Howard Spring's bestseller on which the serial is based. Philip Maddox stars in a new drama series on BBC2, Ennell's Point, the lives and adventures of a fictitious Welsh lifeboat crew. In the new Radio Times, the background to the making of the series with the real Mumbles lifeboat. And Police, a major new documentary series which takes a unique look behind the scenes of the Thames Valley Constabulary. Police starting next Monday on BBC1 and on the cover of the new edition of Radio Times.
In 10 minutes, Barry Took presents a look back at the pick of television highlights for 1981 to select that which achieved esteem, popularity or notoriety in the last 12 months. Pick of 81. But in less than 2 hours' time, it's the clock face of Big Ben that will hold our attention as we welcome in 1982, live from Trafalgar Square. Before that, though, we have the last main news programme on BBC1 for 1981 with Richard Baker. It is 10 past 10.
The lifeboatmen of Mousehole in Cornwall have refused to operate their new boat as anger grows over the Disaster Appeal Fund. The men who've taken over from the 8 who died are refusing to train for or operate the replacement lifeboat. Since the disaster 12 days ago, money has been pouring into the tiny village of Mousehole. But now, lawyers are warning that relatives of the dead may not get all of it. And the new lifeboatmen say, we won't let them go cap in hand for money. Clive Ferguson reports.
It's the fact that so much money has been sent for the relatives of the 8 lifeboat men who died that's caused the problem. There's over £1.5 million, and the trustees of the fund won't know until after they meet the charity commissioners next week if their legal status allows them to give the relatives all the money or just enough to cover their immediate needs. Until the position is clarified, the new lifeboat for Penlee will stay in the boathouse. The volunteer crew say they won't launch her, nor will they start training to use her. The new boat will probably be brought to Penlee tomorrow. In the meantime, all emergencies will be covered from nearby New Lynn. The decision not to operate the boat was taken at an emergency meeting of the lifeboat men, held shortly before the funeral of one of the men who died, 41-year-old John Blewett. Among the mourners was one of the crew of the new lifeboat, Mike Sutherland, who later told me of the village's feeling about the controversy over the Disaster Appeal Fund.
It's one of disbelief, anger, sorrow, a whole mixture of feelings. I know some of the families that have seen and spoken to were gradually becoming aware of their role in life afterwards, and this money was going to be of great help to them. Although they didn't expect any money to come to them, they are very, very grateful, and there's no words that can thank for the people that have donated nationwide. And I think they're shocked and confused even more now as a result of this than the loss of their menfolk.
The Prime Minister says there's a growth in the efficiency of British industry, and this gives Britain the best chance of pulling out of the recession. In a New Year interview with our political editor, Mrs Thatcher said output was up, productivity at a record level, and very little overmanning left. I think we're through the worst, she said. Unemployment, though, was still her biggest worry.
But I believe that if you take the economy as a whole, we are through the worst, although always unemployment rises in the winter and will rise, I'm afraid, during the next 2 months if you look back over the last decade. unemployment's risen from December to January. But I believe we've the best hope now of getting through the world recession than we've had for a very long time.
In the same interview, the Prime Minister said the West must stand together in the Polish crisis, despite differences of opinion over sanctions between the United States and West Germany. Some very firm measures were needed, she said, to help the Polish people.
Above all, the Western Alliance must stand together. We're the people, whether in Europe or the United States, who have peace with freedom. We must keep that peace with freedom, and we must stand together when people like the people of Poland want, above all, a little more freedom. They were getting it. And then, of course, it can't coexist either with communism or with a military government, and it's snuffed out. We feel very strongly about it. Well, Carrington and I wanted there to be a meeting this week of the foreign ministers of the European countries. Some of them weren't quite ready to come, but they're meeting next week. We must all stand together, and we must, in some respects, support the lead which President Reagan has given.
Diplomatic reports reaching the West say the Polish military regime is acutely worried about Western reaction to its takeover, is hoping West Germany, its biggest European trading partner in particular, won't join in the kind of sanctions already announced by President Reagan and supported at least in principle by Mrs. Thatcher. The regime in Poland continues to maintain the country is completely peaceful, but reports of unrest persist. Tonight, reliable sources inside Poland tell us that troops and militia have been surrounding an ammunition factory at Piotrków near Radom throughout the Christmas period. The AVN factory there is a major worry because the military government is afraid that if opposition groups obtain ammunition and explosives, they could set up a guerrilla-style resistance movement. The other focus of worry for General Jaruzelski is the port of Gdansk, where, according to reports reaching us today, several people were forced to throw themselves off a flyover when a squadron of tanks charged into a crowd of demonstrators. Workers at the Lenin shipyard in Gdansk, the birthplace of Solidarity, have been told they won't be allowed back unless they sign a document pledging allegiance to the military government and renouncing Solidarity. Only 3 out of every 10 workers have signed so far. None of this was reported tonight on Polish television. Instead, a grateful and presumably well-rehearsed population showered gifts on soldiers. In these propaganda broadcasts, which make up in length what they lose in subtlety, the season of goodwill is a present from the military. Whether any goodwill will last beyond the weekend is open to question. On Monday, the Poles go back to their factories after the Christmas and New Year break.
For the second time in less than 3 years, an Air Force officer in Ghana has led a military takeover there. There were reports of fighting in the capital, Accra, and heavy firing was heard at the city's airport. But there doesn't appear to have been any major violence. Flight Lieutenant Jerry Rawlings told Ghanaians about the coup in a broadcast on Accra radio after his men had seized the station.
I'm not here to impose myself on this country. Far from it. We're asking for nothing more than proper democracy. I am prepared at this moment to face a firing squad. If what I'm trying to do for the second time in my life does not meet the approval of Ghanaians.
Rawlings, a popular fighter pilot, first took power in June 1979. Then he promised to wipe out the corruption rife in Ghana. He installed an Armed Forces Revolutionary Council which ordered the executions of 8 senior officers, including 2 former heads of state. President Hilla Liman won the general election organized by Rawlings in September 1979. But his party has recently been involved in several financial scandals, and today he was deposed by Rawlings, who described senior government officials as criminals. Northern Ireland. A soldier has been wounded in a provisional IRA ambush in South Armagh near Crossmaglen. A number of gunmen opened fire with automatic weapons on an army patrol, hitting the soldier. He was taken to hospital, but is not seriously injured. Water authorities in many parts of the country say the rapid thaw has brought flooding on a scale seen only once every 10 years. The West has been particularly badly hit, with the rivers Severn and Avon already flooded and more flooding expected tonight. Hundreds of acres of farmland are under water. Andrew Harvey is our reporter.
The level of the River Severn between Tewkesbury and Gloucester has been rising all day. The Severn Trent Water Authority say it's the worst flooding for 13 years, and they don't expect levels to start dropping until the early hours of tomorrow. Hundreds of acres of farmland are already underwater. The police have warned motorists not to venture onto flooded roads unless they're sure of the depth of the water. Scores of buildings have been turned into islands near the river. The flooding has been caused not by breaches in the banks, but simply by water levels rising above them. For people in some of the worst affected villages, small boats have provided the only means of ferrying in supplies. The county's already been badly hit by snow this winter, and the cost of the thaw is now likely to run into many thousands of pounds. But any accurate assessment of the damage will have to wait until the waters finally stop rising.
And that's the news for 1981. If you